So yesterday was the 75th anniversary of the Victory in Europe Day, VE Day. And there's been lots of celebrations, people partying out in the streets, maybe having picnics in their front garden somewhere down the road. It's a bit difficult with all the social distancing and so on, but people have made a bit of a go out of it. We've had the red arrows flying over London. We've had the Spitfires flying along the coastline of the white cliffs of Dover, and people singing out in the streets. At least on Friday evening, where people did it round here. People were singing a song associated with the Second World War, with Vera Lynn's song "We'll Meet Again." Don't know where, don't know when. Believe it or not, Vera Lynn is still alive. She's 103. She had just had her birthday back in March. And as part of her birthday celebrations, she gave a little talk. She says that she doesn't sing, not for public anyway, anymore. But as part of her talk, she said, hope remains even in the most difficult of times. And then she quoted her infamous words from her song, bearing in mind that she was talking about this whole lockdown and us having to live with this kind of situation. Hope remains even in the most difficult of times, and as she says, but don't forget, we will meet again. It's kind of encouraging. Some strong words from someone who was very strong and supportive of the troops during the Second World War. But just to give a wider context of what she was saying in her little talk, she says freedom returns after the most difficult of times. Going back to the hope bit, hope remains even in the most difficult of times, and that simple acts of bravery and sacrifice still define our nation as the NHS works so hard to care for us. So indeed, thank you, people of the NHS and all the other people that are just keeping life going and looking after us when we are ill. We will get through this. We will meet again. The story we are living with this pandemic today echoes. It's not the same, but it echoes that which people experienced during the Second World War. Certainly that's the words of Dame Vera Lynn. Hope. Hope remains even in the most difficult of times. But this time that we experience now, with this pandemic, and as we remember the end of the Second World War and the many people that gave of their lives that we may have this freedom, this victory in Europe, VE Day, there were many other times where people around the world have had times of difficulty. But in those times of difficulty, there is an opportunity of hope. And it's one of those opportunities of hope that I want us to look at today. I want to look at the story of Gideon. Gideon we can find in Judges chapters 6, 7 and 8. But here we find at the beginning of the story, Gideon, bearing in mind the context, is Gideon is from the small tribe, from a small family and the smallest tribe, an insignificant tribe really, of the 12 of the tribes of Israel, God's people. And there he is, but the problem is this God's people, they're being oppressed. The Midianites and other armies, they've been fighting against the Israelites. In fact, they're so strong when they come over, they wait for the Israelites to grow their crops and have lots of livestock, and then they come along and then they plunder, they fight people off, and then they plunder the land, and they take all the livestock and all the produce, and then they clear off again, oppressing, persecuting God's people, the Israelites. So that's why we find Gideon with this bit of grain that he's got, trying to make sure that the Midianites aren't around. Well, what better place to do it? Don't do it at home. Don't do it, well, in the barn or somewhere that they think that you might find the food. So it must have been out of season for the grapes. So that would have been a good place to go. No one's going to come here because the grapes aren't ready yet. So let's just make some flour. And he's thrashing out the wheat there. And then suddenly this messenger from God appears. And this messenger from God says, don't worry, fear not, God is with you. God is with me. Don't you get the situation? I mean, here I am. I'm trying to provide for my family and looking out for any of the enemy. And I'm thrashing wheat here in this vineyard. And you're saying, God is with me? Actually, I've got a few questions for you, messenger from God. We've heard these stories of long ago of how God delivered us people out of Egypt, and here we are in this promised land, but now we're being oppressed. Where's God? We want some miracles. We want some signs. We want to know that God is with us. Well, they had this conversation, and Gideon goes off to be hospitable to the guest. He goes off to prepare a meal. And it must have been some time, because Gideon makes a meal with, well, he bakes some bread, it says, and then he cooks an animal. And then he gets up this stewy broth as well that he brings along to the messenger. And the messenger's still sitting there waiting for this hospitality, with this echo of Gideon complaining about, well, signs and wonders and miracles. That's what we want to see, that God is actually with us with these miracles. So Gideon presents him with this plate of food, and the messenger says, oh, just put it on that rock over there. So he puts it on the rock, and he says, just pour over the broth. So he does that, and then the messenger stretches out his staff and touches this plate of food. Just in an instant, it just gets consumed with fire. It burns to a sizzle. Wow. There you go, Gideon. God is with you. You want a sign? That's a good one to start with. Gideon says, but with me, God is with me. In fact, the messenger says to Gideon first, this is the message from God, go. I want you to defeat the oppressing army. Remember, I am with you. Go, I am with you. And then Gideon starts looking at all the problems. But little old me, you want me to go and fight this great big oppressing army? I could maybe rustle a few people together, but little old me, I mean, I'm just it's just me left, and I'm here from a small little family, a little clan, as part of the tribe of a little tribe, an insignificant tribe, Manasseh. I mean, who are we? Couldn't you find someone else from a better well-known tribe, one with a bit bigger reputation? But hereby lies one of the lessons that we can learn from this story. That when God says, go, I am with you, then God doesn't need us to look at ourselves, however significant or insignificant we feel. Instead of looking at ourselves, we need to look to God. So it's okay, we're ready to listen and receive that command, go, I'm with you, then stop looking at yourself and your own problems. Look at God and realize that there is no problem for God. It doesn't matter how significant or insignificant you feel, it's how significant God is to you. So go. So he must have gone off and told his dad about it, because we pick up later on the story that his dad must have known. But that night or a subsequent night, just before Gideon goes off and builds his army, God comes to Gideon and he says, something we need to sort out first. You see, his dad, Joash, has built in the town this altar, not to God, but to Baal. And there's something of a problem. God's people not worshipping God, but worshipping Baal. Is it any wonder that they were being oppressed? And they're not following after God, and they're following after some other false gods? God says, I need you to do a little job. I need you to put something straight and to help teach these people something. So it says that Gideon takes 10 servants with him. And at night, because he couldn't have done this during the day, but at night he goes down there, he flattens this altar to Baal, rebuilds it for God, and then there's some other wooden things around that he chops down that's all to do with this worship of Baal. And he uses all this wood as part of his fire, and he gives a sacrifice to God. It's like God usurping these false gods, this false thought that these people had. And then he clears off. And then the next day, these people turn up. We're on our way to give our offerings. And what? What's going on? Have you seen those programs where people go into a house or into a garden and they'll redo the garden? The owners have gone away for a few days, or whether it's known or unknown, like a surprise or something. Anyway, there's a refurbishment job going on, and suddenly there's the big reveal. Whether it's a few days and then they've rebuilt the garden, or 9 days and they've rebuilt the house, and then you come in and it's like, look at that! Wow, this is amazing, and you did this in just a few days. Well, that's a bit like what happened here. It's just it wasn't a few days, it was just overnight. And they're kind of like, well, what happened to our place of worship? What happened to our altar to Baal? Who's done this? They start asking around, and then they find out it's Gideon and his mates. So they go off to Joash, and bearing in mind Joash is his dad, and Joash is actually the one who built the original altar. It's quite important. And then they say, look, do you know what your son's done? We want to sort him out. And then Joash says something very clever. This is why I think he must have known that what had happened with Gideon and this messenger from God. And then Joash says, well, guys, I realise you're upset, but you don't need to fight for Baal. If Baal is real, let Baal fight for himself. And they seem to have taken it. And of course, nothing happens to Gideon. These people that started off being so offended by Gideon's actions, of sorting out something that separated them from God, that they became Gideon's first recruits. Gideon builds an army. In fact, he builds such an army that he gets 32,000 people there. But just before he builds this army, Gideon has another little nervy moment. You see, Gideon comes to God and says, look, I hope you don't mind, but just to give me a little bit of confidence, could you help me with this whole signs and miracles thing? If I put a fleece out at night, the ground will be wet, so just let the ground be wet, but keep the fleece dry. God does it. And just he's still getting a little bit nervy, and he says, look, oh God, I'm really, really sorry, but could we do that the other way around? So tonight, just make the ground dry, all of the ground dry, and the fleece wet. God does it. God gave Gideon some confidence. God had told Gideon through the messenger, go, I am with you. God said to Gideon, I am going to give you the victory. But there's something that needed to be sorted out first. Something that needed to be cleared away. So I wonder about us. If we're looking for God to give us the victory, is there still something that we need to give up for God? Say, you know what, this is really not right, so I'm going to give it up to you, God. God doesn't expect us to sort it out and then come back to me and then I'll give you the victory. God says, look, I'm here to work it through with you. I'll give you instructions, I'll show you how. That's great news. But sometimes God doesn't give us the victory because he needs us to sort something else out first. So let's come to God and say, God, before you give us the victory, what do you need to sort out in my life? So Gideon calls for an army. He ends up getting 32,000 people. But it's not enough. They're still outnumbered. The army, this oppressing army, the enemy has come and they're camping in Israel again, and they're in this plain down here, and these 32,000 Israelites are up here, but they're outnumbered still. There's still a lot of number, 32,000 people, but they're outnumbered. But that's all right. God said, I'm with you. I'm going to give you the victory. But then God says something strange to Gideon. He says, I'm going to give you the victory, but I need to thin out the numbers a little bit. And this is what I want you to do. I want you to offer to the people, if they are afraid, then they can go home. Well, that sounds a little bit strange, doesn't it? They're afraid, they can go home. The appeal has gone out from Gideon. People have joined. So why would they be afraid? Well, all sorts of reasons. Maybe they're realising that the truth of the matter is they are outnumbered, and there they are. I can see them. And we are really going to get a telling off for this one. So in that opportunity of giving up and walking away, letting fear take over rather than faith in God, 22,000 people left. And he started with 32,000, that they were in the minority, they were already outnumbered. But we see what Gideon does with this army is actually something that Moses talked about. Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 5 to 8, talks about when you get this army together, if there's anyone there who has just built a house, who hasn't blessed it, dedicated it to God, then they can go home. And anyone who has just planted a vineyard but hasn't received a crop from it, they can go home. And anyone here just got engaged, you can go home. We don't want your wife to be a widow prematurely, so you can go home. And then in Deuteronomy 20 it says, and anyone that is fearful, they can go home. This is the army. Fearful. Yeah, of course. You don't want scaredy cats around, people dragging you down with your emotion and your courage to go forward with God. So they went from 32,000 down to 10,000. They are super outnumbered now. But then God comes to Gideon again and he says, I've been thinking about this. I still need to thin out the numbers. I'm going to give you the victory, but I want to make sure that people don't feel as though they got the victory. So I need you to thin out the numbers. And there's another little lesson for us. That when God says he's going to do something, we need to make sure that we're not looking around at opportunities of us taking the credit. God takes those 10,000 and he says, look, I want you to do a drink test. All those people that drink from the river like a dog, then they can go home. And anyone else that cups and drinks, they can stay. And then they went from 10,000 down to 300. That's all. Talk about outnumbered. Talk about this just doesn't work out. This is nonsense. But this is God. God had promised he was going to give them the victory. And he wasn't about to give up on the promise. Gideon must have been a bit afraid, a bit concerned. God says, look, I'm going to give you the victory. I want you to do something. I want you to take one of your servants. I want you to go right up to the edge of the camp and listen to what the Midianites are talking about. So they creep in. And it's dark. And they listen to hear what the Midianites are talking about. And this one Midianite is talking with his mate and he says, I had a funny dream last night. I don't think I had too much macaroni cheese late at night, but I had this really funny dream. And I dreamt that this barley loaf rolled down the hill and it flattened my tent. It's strange, isn't it? And his mate says, well, you know what that means. That means only one thing. It can only mean one thing. What does it mean? Well, it can only mean one thing. It can only mean that God is with Gideon and not Midian. That we're going to be losers. Gideon goes with his servant back to the 300 people that are left. He says, this is the plan. God's going to give us victory. And I want you to break up into 3 groups, 100 each. I'm going to give you a clay pot and a torch and a trumpet. And we're going to go down. My group of 100 will go right up to the edge of the camp. And when you see us break our clay pots and the lights suddenly come on and we'll blow our trumpet, I want you to do the same. Crack, blow. And that's what happened. Gideon took his group of 100 down, crack, blow, and the other 300, the other 200, 300 are all together. They're all cracking their pots. The lights are coming on. This is the middle of the night. It says in Scripture, this is after midnight. Suddenly the lights are coming on. Just these 300 people blowing their horns. Have you ever seen these little video clips? I saw one the other day of a white tigress, and she's kind of licking her paws and preening herself a little bit, and suddenly this little tiger cub appears, sort of jumps behind her, and this white tigress flinches like this. Maybe you've seen the one of the panda like that as well, the little baby panda and the mummy panda, and then the little baby panda sneezes. A little tiny sneeze, but a little tiny sneeze is enough for this mummy panda to absolutely jump out of her skin. Maybe you've even seen the other ones, the human ones, people lying in bed fast asleep, and someone's got their video camera going, and then suddenly into shot you get the air horn, and this person absolutely fast asleep, absolutely jumps out of their skin. Well, that's the kind of thing that happened. Crack the pots, blow the trumpet. God was going to give them the victory. They were so confused, so disorientated, that they started fighting each other. It was almost over, but there was a group of them that got away, this enemy force. And they went running off in a certain direction. And it was at that point, this man Gideon, from this totally insignificant little tribe of Manasseh, calls upon his neighbours, the ones with the big names, the big fighters from Ephraim, and says, hey guys, there's a group of people that are running away from us. We're going to get the victory, but could you go after them and could you find them? And they do, and they go after them and they find them, and they're actually, as part of this group, these are the commanders of the armies, the enemy. And they absolutely, well, they capture them and they get rid of them. And then the penny drops. Hang on a minute. We're the ones with the reputation. You're just little old Manasseh. And you've gone out and you're fighting against our enemies and you're winning. And they come and ask Gideon, look, why didn't you come and ask us to get involved in this before? Because, we'd like a bit of this action. This looks like a bit of credit that we could get. And very cleverly, Gideon says to them, look, my victory here is very insignificant. You got the commanders and so on. So, well done, guys. All credit to you. Because you're Ephraim. We have victory with Ephraim. VE Day. Well, they seem to swallow that one. They think that that's enough of a compliment for them. So off they go, and then Gideon takes his 300 men and he goes over the Jordan, heading east, and he starts chasing a few others that have gone racing off. He has some other stories and events and activities that happen as well. And all in all, it comes down to God giving them the victory. God promised it. They had to sort something out that seemed to get in the way of their real, true connection with God, their true worship of God. And then God gave them the victory. And God gave them the victory, though, in a way to make sure that they knew it isn't in your strength, it's in God's strength. And that's the kind of victory that God wants to give us. He wants to come to us and say, you know what, you may feel as though you're oppressed, you may have some serious problems, but I'm going to give you the victory. But first, let's sort out some of these other things that are getting in the way. And then I want to make sure that you know that it's not about you, it's not about your strength, your ability. It's always about me. God will give you the victory. That's his promise. In chapter 8, verse 22, it says that the people wanted to make Gideon their judge because he saved them. Gideon says, no way. You won't make me your judge or any of my kids your judge. The only person that can be your judge is God himself. He does a little deal just to recognise the role in leading that he took, and he benefits out of it. And then it says that the people continued to worship God, and things were good in the land until Gideon died. And then, because of some other family feud, it ends up that the people pursue Baal And thereby we have this continuation of this tick-tock, tick-tock, with the people of Israel, the people that say that they're God followers. At first following after God, and then going after someone else and something else, and then back to God when they realise, oh, isn't life so terrible? Let's go and petition God again, and backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. Hope remains, even in the most difficult of times. Those were the words of Dame Vera Lynn just a couple of months ago. Hope remains even in the most difficult of times. It's when we forget God that our lives get messy. So don't forget God. Put God first in your everything and your everyday. God will give you the victory. There may be some things to tidy up, because you've allowed your life to get a bit messy. But God's going to help you through that too. Are you hoping that God will give you the victory in life now and life eternal? God will give you the victory. But what will you need to give up for God first? Stay safe. Stay saved.